Hi, I'm Susan Craven. Um, I'd like to apologize for my tardiness in getting this out. My son recently started preschool and has decided to bring home every illness known to man, so we've had to combat for the past couple of months anyway. And it's been quite a chore. I guess that's one of the advantages of being a parent, um, which leads into this segment. My presentation is on poetry, and for as long as my children have been alive, and even before they were alive, when they were inside of me, I read to them. I thought it was very important to read all the time, different types of material, books that is. Never read poetry, but I did read books. And I felt like they had an advantage when they came into the world. Um, and then all growing up, I have a 21-year-old, so he was read to all the time. Still is, as a matter of fact. He will occasionally ask to be read to. My 4-year-old is now in preschool, and he's being read to there. Um, and of course, once they get into, excuse me, elementary school, then the teachers have that advantage of being able to use a book to as a segue into a theme, or to uh, if they have extra time, and they can put a book in there if they want to calm the children down, read a book. If they have a couple minutes at the end of the day, they can read a book. Um, so everybody has that advantage of being able to use that book. I never, when my oldest was growing up, thought about reading poetry. My first thought when somebody says poetry is can- Canterbury Tales, or something just dreadful and dreary, and either somebody's lost a love and is going to kill themselves over it, or it's all about love and it's too mushy-gushy. Um, so poetry never interested me until this project. Um, and I think after doing the research, I think it's very important to implement poetry into children's lives. So I guess the first thing is we need to define what poetry is. It's defined as a literary work in which special intensity is given to the expression of feelings and ideas by the use of distinctive style and rhythm, poems collectively or as a genre of literature. So what does all that mean? I guess poetry is an experience, and it's produced by two elements of language, sense and sound. It evokes emotion, it evokes images. Reading that perfect piece of poetry can bring you back to when you were 5, or bring you back to your mother's kitchen with the smell of a cake baking, or even feeling the crunch of leaves underneath your feet when you were walking in the fall when you were younger. And of course, all this poetry we've had all our lives. We just didn't call it poetry. We've called it finger plays. We've called it nursery rhymes. We've called it songs, that nonsensical things that we repeat to a baby as poetry. There are many elements of poetry. Um, Rhythm, which is the steady beat that the poem holds as you read it. The rhyme and the sound and the patterns of the words used. Some are even made up words, but they're repetitive. Um, the imagery, the picture the poem puts into your mind. And the figurative language, personification, of course, and the similes and the metaphors using like and as, and metaphor where you're actually writing as if something was a different form. Such as the Three Little Kittens with your personification. And here you're bringing animals to life and treating them as if they were people. And this is my first example. The 3 little kittens, they lost their mittens, and they began to cry. Oh, mother dear, we sadly fear that we have lost our mittens. What? Lost your mittens, you naughty kittens? Then you shall have no pie. Meow, 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 then you shall have no pie. And here we have the three kittens, the children, with the mother who's scolding them as if they were a real parent and they had lost their mittens, so they don't get that reward. Poetry has a history, and it began long before the written word. Poetry was actually used to remember things. You know, we call them folk tales, tall tales, but it was a means of recording history so that it would be remembered. Storytelling, remember all those poems and songs and chants from The Hobbit? That's what they were in that particular movie, even though it was a fiction movie. Many of the poems were chanted, but they had that particular rhythm, and it was composed for and during a performance to build that history. Once poetry was written down, it then became a written word created for that absent reader, that person who wasn't there, who would be able to later read it. We all know, you know, the song A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's a poem. And then, of course, we have those little things that we can remember other things with. 30 days, half September, April, May, and November. It's a poem. And then pieces of little snippets in history that we had to remember in class. And how do we do it? Well, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Another form of poetry. We just didn't know it. Or that's not what we called it. There are all kinds of poetry. There's cowboy poetry, which comes from cowboys gathering around campfires. They tell tall tales and folk songs about the ranch. And there's still cowboy poetry going on today. Black Mountain poetry, which is poetry from the mountains, Black Mountain, North Carolina. They were a group of mid-20th century postmodern poets, and they centered around Black Mountain College, and they used words like your, Y-R, for your, hillbilly or backcountry. Concrete poetry, the arrangement of the words in the poem is just as important as the meaning of the words. For example, if a poem was about love, the words could be written out so that you see a heart. Or if it was about a star or the sky, it would be printed out so that the poem itself forms the shape of the star. Martian poetry, never heard of that. Everyday things are described in a weird way, as if Martians were describing it and don't quite understand the world. An epitaph, I think most of us know what that is, a short text honoring a dead person. And slam poetry is the newest thing, which is a competition where poets read or recite their original work. So poetry doesn't necessarily have to rhyme, and it doesn't have to be about a particular thing. It can be about anything. It tells a story. A limerick. They're popular in children's poetry, usually nonsensical words and funny, yet sometimes crude. They have 5 lines and they have a specific pattern. Free verse follows no specific pattern except the natural rhythm of spoken language. There are some books now that are out that are in free verse. It's written as if it was a poem, and a lot of teens like to read those books. Not quite sure why. However, I've never tried to read one either. So, a haiku is a Japanese poem. 3 lines, 17 syllables. Your 5, your 7, your 5 syllables. They're usually very simple, and they're usually about nature. So here's a poem written by Joan Mitchell called Autumn. And as you hear the poem, you can probably feel, smell, and imagine what I'm reading. The rusty leaves crunch and crackle. Blue haze hangs from the dim sky. The fields are matted with sun-tanned stalks. wind rushes by. The last red berries hang from the thorn tree, and the last red leaves fall to the ground. Bleakness through the trees and bushes comes without sound. Typically that would evoke images of crunchy leaves out in the fall and that dreary fall day, kind of like a couple weeks ago when it was so rainy and cold and bleak. So why is poetry so important for children? What's the big deal about poetry? Well, something that I learned was it helps children develop their pre-reading and communication skills. When the poems are read out loud, the poetry turns into rhythms and beats and sounds and even music. And everybody, no matter what age, will feel that rhythm, the natural rhythm. They also get phonological awareness, which means they hear the sounds that make up words. And the words don't have to be real words. Some of them can be made up. It's just the awareness of those sounds coming out. A rich vocabulary, a lot of talking going on there. And most people know that the more you talk and the more you read to a child, the bigger their vocabulary is. And they have that advantage when they get to school. They have a richer vocabulary. The background knowledge a child might have about the world, it gets bigger with poetry. It motivates reluctant writers as it opens up the English language for anything. So if you have, we have reluctant readers who like to read graphic novels because there are few words. Reluctant writers are the same thing. They're not fond of writing, but can they write anything they want to? That may change their image of writing. It can allow children to paint their lives and describe a situation or event that might otherwise be difficult for them to do. And when I wrote that, I was thinking mainly of a teen or an older child who maybe had a situation, maybe a death in the family, maybe a horrific situation, a form of abuse that happened, and they need to get it out. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to write about it, but maybe a poem with words that can describe their hurt or their anger or their fear, whatever it is. It may be something that's happy. Whatever it is, they can use those words to help describe their emotions and in turn help people understand maybe how they feel, or at least the emotions they're feeling. A Child's Garden of Verse is a book of poems. This was written by Robert Louis Stevenson, and this is one of the best poetry books that you can get a young child and to read with. This poem is entitled "The Swing," and it's about somebody who's swinging a child. How do you like to go up in a swing, up in the air so blue? Oh, I do think the pleasantest thing ever a child can do. Up in the air and over the wall, till I can see so wide, river and trees and cattle and all, over the countryside. Till I look down on the garden green, down on the roof so brown, up in the air I go flying again, up in the air and down. You can almost feel the wind, the breeze in your hair as the swing goes back and forth. And everybody's been on a swing before. You remember that. The Best of Ogden Nash. This is another poetry book, and this is a little nonsensical. It's about a little girl named Isabel and her adventures that she has that I don't think any of us would have typically. Isabel met an enormous bear. Isabel didn't care. The bear was hungry, the bear was ravenous. The bear's big mouth was cruel and cavernous. The bear said, Isabel, glad to meet you. How do, Isabel? Now I'll eat you. Isabel didn't worry. Isabel didn't scream or scurry. She washed her hands and she straightened her hair up, and then Isabel quietly ate the bear up. And there again, you bring the bear to life, and you have some really big, rich words in there that just broaden the vocabulary of the listeners. Once in a night as black as pitch, Isabel met a wicked old witch. The witch's face was cross and wrinkled, the witch's gums with teeth were sprinkled. Ho, ho, Isabel, the old witch crowed, I'll turn you into an ugly toad. Isabel didn't worry. Isabel didn't scream or scurry. She showed no rage and she showed no rancor, but she turned the witch into milk and drank her. So you've got a little repetition going on too. Isabel met a hideous giant. Isabel continued self-reliant. The giant was hairy, the giant was horrid. He had one eye in the middle of his forehead. Good morning, Isabel, the giant said. I'll grind your bones to make my bread. Isabel didn't worry. Isabel didn't scream or scurry. She nibbled a Zwieback that she always fed off. And when it was gone, she cut the giant's head off. Isabel met a troublesome doctor. He punched and he poked till he really shocked her. The doctor's talk was of coughs and chills, and the doctor's satchel bulged with pills. The doctor said unto Isabel, swallow this, it will make you well. Isabel didn't worry. Isabel didn't scream or scurry. She took those pills from the pill concoctor, and Isabel calmly cured the doctor. So you have the repetition, you have the big language, and one thing to remember is the kids don't need to understand every single word or every single line. You don't have to tear the whole poem apart. I think we all remember those high school days when we sat in the classroom and you had to tear the poem apart line by line. That's not what it's all about. You're trying to get the image, you're trying to get the feeling, and they don't necessarily have to understand every single word to get that. So what to do, or what not to do? Surround students with as many types of poetry books as possible and let them choose what they prefer. As a general rule, girls prefer poetry more than boys. That doesn't mean boys don't like it. You're just going to have to find their niche, what they truly like. After teaching what 911 means, I thought this was pretty catchy. Teach what 811 means, which is the poetry number in the library. And don't, like I said before, don't try to analyze every poem and every word. Just enjoy the rhythm and the imagery that it provokes from reading the poetry. A final thought. And this is from Jim Trelease from the Read Aloud Handbook. And in the bibliography, there is a link to it if you would like to see that. If a child has never heard the word, the child will never say the word. And if you've neither heard it nor said it, it's pretty tough to read it and to write it. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you learned something. Now go get a poetry book.